Knowledge is power, and I'm sure everyone can agree that being smart is always an asset. But what about if you've actually completely gone off the rails and abandoned everything, even your morals or science? My name is Aster, and welcome to the Dissecting the Archetype Series, where I talk about popular character modes in anime, cartoons, and other forms of media. And today, let's talk about the mad scientists, why they're so popular, what makes them work, and what makes them not work. Disclaimer, this is just my opinion and a personal guide based on my dumbass walking around and watching random shows. Don't worry, all of these tips can definitely work for any other archetype, but I just think that they're super important when writing or not writing a mad scientist. And I'm trying out a new piece of content if this is your first time watching this video, so if you want me to dissect other archetypes in media, then feel free to leave your suggestions below. So what is the mad scientist archetype? The mad scientist is a character archetype that's depicted by their sheer, almost omnipotent intelligence. They're the characters that almost always have a random gadget that can alter the tides of battle completely, and we usually see them hunkered in a lab somewhere perfecting their work. Their actual personality types vary depending on their characterizations. Some are more self-assigned sociopathic than others, while some prefer the regalities of the mania, and some are just exhausted with life altogether. But the mad scientist is usually characterized as logic-driven, and anyone else that contests their idea of knowledge are simply baseless or incorrect, at least in their eyes. They're constantly seen tinkering with their experiments and expanding the borders on scientific discovery. They're usually the more eccentric characters, absorbed in their work with little time for discussing matters outside of their science. However, what makes them mad is also their lack of empathy and a blatant disregard for human lives and well-beings for the sake of scientific pursuit. Sometimes, the mad scientists would even go as far as to experiment on themselves if they think that would allow for them to reach grander heights in science. What makes the mad scientist a compelling character is that dichotomy between morality and utility. What is too much if you're pursuing knowledge? The mad scientist archetype is a popular trope because viewers get to see into the mind of someone who studies life but doesn't care about it. And it can make for amazing philosophical questions or even challenge the status quo of protagonists and antagonists. Sometimes, the mad scientist is actually working for the greater good of civilization, but just has a very strange outlook on things. Or sometimes, the mad scientist is constantly playing God by thinking they have direct control over lives. Or maybe, the mad scientist is so altruistically driven that they fail to see the microscopic reasons why what they're doing is actually a bad thing. The word mad is less about their mental stability, though let's face it, I'm sure it also contributes to that descriptor, and more about their outlook on lives and perception on reality. Now, how do you write a mad scientist archetype well? Well, first is that they need to wow the character with their creations. You can't have a mad scientist character if the audience doesn't really think they're smart. The fun part about having a mad scientist is that you can almost never predict what they're up to or what they're thinking. It's always like they're one step ahead of you, because most likely, they are. Mad scientist characters need to wow the audience with their creations to cement how different they are from the rest of the cast, and that they're also a force to be reckoned with. In a fantasy world, give them a gun. In a modern world, make them discover magic. Mad scientists aren't just mad, but they're extremely smart and a volatile character, so to best show their wits is to have them innovate and change the narrative. And who knows, maybe they can even be the potential problem that the characters inevitably have to stop, for better or for worse. Number 2 is give them a good reason to have what they have. When writing mad scientist characters, always consider where in the world are they getting these materials from? This could either be from their funding or their creativity. Characters as resource heavy as this need to have an actual good reason, or else it's just gonna feel like an ass pull if they accidentally find this mysterious ancient artifact or somehow have tens of thousands of TNT. This also works with asking, how did they get super smart? You know how a character has to train so that they can get super buffed? Well, it's also a good idea to show your mad scientists at work, tinkering away something or even just regularly studying. Just small glimpses into their background really cements to the audience that Yeah, this character is smart and they deserve to be known as smart. It's also nice to see their thinking process outside of just grand theories. Some of my favorite moments is when the scientist is presented with a really weird problem and then they just pull out this massive chalkboard and it's over for everyone involved. It's always important to show, not tell, especially when it comes to something as powerful as intelligence. Number 3 is balance their unparalleled intelligence with another flaw. One of my biggest critiques when it comes to mad scientist characters is that that's all they ever are. They're smart and overpowered and a little insane, but it's never truly detrimental to the results of their actions. Sure, these characters can have quirks, but flaws can impose interesting limitations and even fatal mistakes to their judgment. And it also makes the character more compelling. Adding adversaries that they need to overcome with their wits can force the mad scientist to readjust their way of thinking. This is especially the case if the character's biggest personality is their pride, and then their whole worldview thinking gets shut down by something stronger. It's always just fun to see a smart character problem solve because, well, that's what they're supposed to be doing. You can have their intelligence be a compensation for something. You can have them be insecure. Number 4 is explore the morality of their sciences. I love when this is depicted in media. One of my favorite moments of this was actually in Code Geass, where they created something that was basically a nuclear bomb. The scientist that discovered this basically realized that what she did was essentially genocide for what happened. And she had to take a step back and reflect on her character to see if what she really did was truly for the greater good. A mad scientist character doesn't have to be socially isolated to be a menace, and they also don't have to be innately evil just because of their morality, and they also don't have to be antagonists just because they're morally evil. It's also important to understand their motivations for being so hell-bent on using unorthodox methods. Understanding why a mad scientist makes their weird gizmos can flesh out their character and can even explain how their behavior affects others. Expanding on the mad part of the mad scientist through their morality is definitely going to give you more compelling characters, because now you have the question of, is life really as precious as we think it is, or what are the limitations and ethics to science? And what if you're put in a place where morality doesn't equate to survivability? Are these means now justified? Something like that could definitely invoke a very deep conversation, and that's definitely what the mad scientist could represent. Number 5 is give them a motivation for doing what they do. Every good character has motivations, because if they don't have any sense of self, then it's almost like watching someone being puppeteered throughout the story. Mad scientists have a reason why they pursue knowledge or keep making these wild inventions, but also why they have so little belief in others. If your character wants to be a god, why? What's wrong with humanity? If your character is horribly bored, why do they have that perspective? This is one of the important things that tie their knowledge into their backstory, which would absolutely help. Mad scientists value logic and reason above everything, but that doesn't remove their more emotional sides. Pride, arrogance, self-loathing, all of the other emotional flaws. Oftentimes, mad scientist characters have certain moments in their past that spark their love for knowledge and maybe even their obsession for science. And now for my personal opinion on how not to write a mad scientist. Number 1 is don't make them above morality. Mad scientist characters always believe that they should be in the right because they're quote-unquote backed by knowledge. But don't forget that just because you know what you're doing doesn't mean you have an omnipotent view on how it affects other people. It's important to distinguish that not all mad scientists are inherently evil, and each of them have a varying degree of morality and logic. But when they do something shady, then they shouldn't be free of criticism just because of their lack of care, but rather have other characters scrutinize their actions. This is especially the case if the character's actions are borderline horrifying or their treatment of others and themselves is downright criminal. A character can believe that they're good and all, but when their creations are directly harming a bunch of people, then it's kind of hard to have plausible deniability. A character can believe that what they're doing is for the greater good, but that doesn't mean that the story can excuse them. Number 2 is don't ignore their potential bonds. The beauty of the mad scientist's strange moralities is actually their ability to function in a social setting, so don't ignore how they affect other people. My personal favorite is understanding how someone so socially deprived can work with others. and how they renegotiate their perception of human lives with the lives of people they deem as close or useful. Some mad scientists have used their bonds as an anchor and motivation to pursue what they can, and others are even more sociable that these bonds are beneficial to their end goal. In the end, the mad scientist shouldn't always be the cooped up fellow in the room, but if you do decide to go with that route, it would also help to see what happens when you do sacrifice sociability for work. What happens when the mad scientist is left alone to all of his thoughts, never to see the light of day? The mad scientist personality archetypes isn't the most palatable when it comes to interacting with other people. That's why it makes it so interesting. Not everyone is a fan of the goody two-shoes, everyone's a friend kind of archetype, so the mad scientist usually is a breath of fresh air. And watching how they interact snarkily with other people can be kind of funny, so don't ignore their potential bonds with other characters. At number 3, and the most important one of all, don't make them feel like a god to the viewers. There is a very thin line between godliness and science, and I've seen too many shows that have made the mistake of putting the two together. Mad scientists need to feel smart rather than overpowered, and while those aren't mutually exclusive, what makes the character a scientist is that they're able to use faux logic to reason their way out of problems, no matter how obscure that logic could be. The mad scientist isn't supposed to be revered by their peers as nigh perfect or omniscient, and definitely not by the story either, but rather as a wild card, and this is especially true for the audience. If the conflict feels like they could just be solved because the mad scientist's overpowered nature, then you've basically lost the intelligence and just came up with a deus ex machina. Smart characters need to show that they're smart rather than them being OP. And it all boils down back again to innovation. I love characters that are able to redefine entire systems just because they found a loophole or they found another way of thinking that's so out of the blue. But they still play by the rules of the system that they're tinkering with. And besides, it's nice to see the smart, overpowered characters fall apart every now and then. It's kind of cathartic. Anyway, that's it for me. The mad scientist archetype is definitely one of my favorite archetypes in all of media. Cold, calculating, and potentially insane. And I am considering changing up this format in the future because it is still a work in progress. Anyway, welcome to the Dissecting series. My name is Aster and thank you for chilling with me. Bye-bye!